The door was slightly open. Just a crack. Just enough for the light from inside the room to spill into the hallway in a thin, warm strip. I had come back to get my cardigan because the dining room was cold and dinner was still an hour away and nobody had thought to turn the heat up. That's the thing about the moments that break your life in two. They don't arrive with any warning. They arrive because you were cold and you wanted a sweater. I pushed the door open and I saw them. My fiancé's hands. My sister's face. The way they pulled apart half a second too late, as if my presence hadn't fully registered yet, as if the world they were existing in had a slight delay before it let real things in. I want to tell you that I reacted immediately. That I walked in and said everything that needed to be said in exactly the way it needed to be said. But that's not what happened. What happened was that I stood in that doorway for exactly 4 seconds, completely silent, completely still, and in those 4 seconds I made a decision that I believe, to this day, was one of the best decisions I have ever made. I took out my phone. I took 3 photographs. And then I walked in. If you need to hear this story all the way through, please subscribe before we go any further. I promise you it gets worse before it gets better, and then it gets better in a way I could not have imagined standing in that doorway, holding my phone, looking at the 2 people I trusted most in the world. My name is Mia. I'm 32 years old. I live in Vancouver, Canada, with my husband James and our 18-month-old daughter, Clara, who has her father's eyes and my stubbornness in equal measure, which means she is going to be an absolute force of nature when she grows up. Our apartment has too many plants and not enough closet space, and I would not trade a single square foot of it for anything in the world. But let me take you back to where this story actually begins, which is not in Canada but in Edinburgh, Scotland, on a Tuesday afternoon in September 5 years ago, when I was 27 years old and had just arrived in a country I had never been to, carrying 2 suitcases and the nervous, exhilarating certainty that I had made either the best or the most terrifying decision of my life. I grew up in Istanbul. I had a good life there, a loving if complicated family, a career in graphic design that was growing steadily, a circle of friends I'd known since university. My mother taught primary school for 30 years. My father ran a small printing business. We were not wealthy, but we were comfortable, and we were close in the particular way of families that prioritize closeness, shared dinners every Sunday, phone calls that were not optional, a general understanding that the family unit was the primary unit, and your loyalty to it was assumed rather than negotiated. I love my family. I want to say that clearly before everything else. What happened later does not erase the fact that I loved them and they loved me, in the ways they knew how, which turned out to have limits I hadn't known about. But the love was real. I had always wanted more education, more specifically a master's degree in visual communication from a European institution. Design education in Turkey is good, but the opportunities after it are narrower than I wanted, and I had been looking at programs in Europe for 2 years before I applied to Edinburgh College of Art on something close to a dare I was making to myself. When I got in, I didn't let myself hesitate long enough to talk myself out of it. I deferred for 1 semester to save money, and then I got on a plane. Edinburgh was everything, and nothing like I expected. Beautiful and cold and full of stone buildings that looked like they had opinions about you. The program was demanding in ways I hadn't fully anticipated. My flat was small and damp and cost more than it should have. I cried into my phone during video calls with my mother at least twice in the first month, not because I was miserable, but because homesickness has a specific weight to it that sometimes has to come out somewhere. I met James in October of that first year. He was not a student. He was a software engineer who had moved to Edinburgh from Vancouver 2 years earlier for a job at a tech company and had, as he put it when we talked about it later, fully intended to move back after his contract ended, and then somehow never gotten around to it because he liked the city too much to leave. He was at the same gallery opening I was at, a student exhibition that a friend of mine had a piece in, and he was standing in front of a large format print looking genuinely puzzled, and I made the mistake of asking him what he thought of it. What followed was a 45-minute conversation that ranged from the print in question to the nature of visual abstraction to the best places to eat in the city to what we had both given up to be in Edinburgh and whether we thought it was worth it. He was thoughtful and funny and honest in the way that some people are, where you can feel the honesty before you can articulate why, and when he asked for my number at the end of the evening, I gave it to him without any of the usual internal debate. We dated for 2 years. Good years, real years, The kind of years that build something solid. I finished my degree. He got a promotion. We moved in together into a flat in Stockbridge that had a small garden neither of us was skilled enough to properly maintain, but both of us loved anyway. He met my family on a video call first, then in person when my parents visited Edinburgh the summer before we got engaged, and my mother, who is not easily impressed by men my age, pulled me into the kitchen at our flat while James was talking to my father in the living room and said, quietly, "He's a good man, Mia. Don't let this one go." My mother is not a woman who gives that kind of endorsement lightly. James proposed on a Sunday morning in our garden in October, exactly 2 years after we'd met at the gallery opening. The ring had belonged to his grandmother. He had apparently been nervous for 3 weeks before doing it. He cried a little, which he was embarrassed about, and which I found completely and irreversibly endearing. I called my mother the moment he went inside to make coffee. I called my sister Layla 5 minutes later. Layla is 3 years younger than me. She had visited Edinburgh once, for 2 weeks the previous spring, staying in our spare room, and she and James had gotten along easily, naturally, the way I had hoped. She was funny and warm with him, and he was patient and kind with her, and I remembered thinking how lucky I was that the two most important people in my life outside of my parents seemed to genuinely like each other. When I called to tell her about the engagement, she screamed. Actual screaming. The kind of scream that makes you hold the phone away from your ear and laugh at the same time. She said she was so happy for me. She said James was perfect. She said she couldn't wait for the wedding. I believed every single word. The dinner where everything fell apart was 4 months after the engagement. It was hosted at the flat of James's colleague Daniel and his wife Sophie, a casual gathering, maybe 12 people, the kind of dinner party where the food is good and the wine is better, and everyone stays 2 hours longer than they planned to. Layla was visiting again, a longer visit this time, 10 days, partly to spend time with me and partly, she said, to see Edinburgh properly since her last trip had been so short. I had been feeling slightly off that week. Tired in a way that I had been attributing to work stress, a big client deadline that had kept me up late 3 nights in a row. I hadn't connected it to anything else yet, though in the back of my mind there was a small, quiet awareness of a possibility I hadn't fully looked at directly. At the dinner, about an hour in, I went to get my cardigan from the bedroom where everyone had left their coats. Daniel and Sophie's flat had an open layout, bedroom at the end of a short hallway, door left ajar. The sounds of the dinner party faded as I walked down the hallway, the laughter and overlapping conversations dimming behind me. I pushed the door. For seconds. 3 photographs. And then I walked in. They heard me the moment I stepped fully into the room. James turned around first. His face ran through 3 expressions in about a second: surprise, recognition, fear, landing finally on a look I had never seen on him before. The look of a man who has been completely, irrevocably caught and knows there is nothing left to say. Layla took a half step back, her hand going to her mouth, her eyes going wide with something that looked like horror, but that I would understand later was not purely horror. There was something else in it. Something practiced. I looked at both of them for a moment. Then I walked directly to James and I slapped him. Hard. The sound of it in that quiet bedroom was enormous. He didn't try to stop me. He didn't say anything. He just put his hand to his cheek and stared at me. I reached down and pulled the ring off my finger. It took a moment because my hands were shaking, and in that moment James reached toward me, saying my name, and I stepped back out of his reach. When the ring came off, I held it for 1 second and then I threw it at him. It hit his chest and fell to the floor. Then I turned to Layla. She had started crying. Quiet tears, the kind that look almost artistic, running perfectly down her face, and even through everything I was feeling I registered that they seemed slightly too perfect, slightly too immediate. But I was also crying by then, the ugly, ragged, shaking kind of crying that doesn't care how it looks, and what came out of my mouth was not eloquent or measured. It was the pure sound of a person who has been hurt by someone they loved completely. How? I said, grabbing her by the arm and pulling her toward me, close enough that she couldn't look away. How did you do this to me? How did you sit at our table and eat my food and sleep in my house and smile at me every single day this week and do this to me? Mia, she said. Mia, please, do not say my name right now. My voice was shaking so hard I could barely hear myself. Do not say my name like you know me. You don't know me. Anyone who knew me could not have done this. I shook her arm. Not hard, not violently, but the shake of someone who needs an answer so badly their body tries to force one out of the air. And then James stepped forward.
Not toward me.
Toward Layla. He put his hand on her arm, the arm I was holding, and said, "Are you okay? Are you okay?" I let go of Layla's arm. I put my hand against my own stomach, a gesture I hadn't planned and didn't understand until later. The tears were pouring down my face. The room was spinning slightly, the way rooms do when your body is handling more than it was built to hold. "I hate you," I said. The words came out very quietly. "I hate both of you." And I walked out. The sounds of the dinner party hit me as soon as I turned out of the hallway. Laughter. Someone telling a story. The clink of wine glasses. I walked through it all without stopping, grabbed my coat from a hook near the front door without looking at anyone, and left before anyone had a chance to notice that anything had happened. Outside, the October air was cold and sharp, and I stood on the pavement for a moment breathing. Just breathing. Then I walked home. 40 minutes on foot through Edinburgh streets that I had come to love over 3 years, past the cafe where James and I had coffee every Saturday morning, past the bookshop where I had spent too much money on books I didn't need but couldn't leave without, and I walked all of it without feeling any of it, because I was doing a calculation in my head that was taking up everything I had. The tiredness. The nausea that had been vague and intermittent enough to dismiss. The thing I had been not quite looking at for a week and a half. I stopped at a pharmacy on the way home. I bought 2 tests. I took them both the moment I got back to our flat, sitting on the bathroom floor with my coat still on, and both of them said the same thing. I sat on that bathroom floor for a long time. The person I wanted to call most in the world was my mother. The person I called second and third and 27th most in the world were, in different capacities and for different reasons, both suddenly and catastrophically unavailable to me. So I called my mother. She answered on the second ring, the way she always does, as if she keeps her phone specifically within reach in case one of her daughters needs her. Her voice was warm and ordinary, and hearing it made the tears that I had been holding in for the 40-minute walk come out all at once.
Mia?
What's wrong? I told her. All of it. The dinner party. The open door. The 4 seconds. The slap and the ring and James's hand on Layla's arm. I told her in the broken, non-linear way that stories come out when you are sitting on a bathroom floor crying into your phone. My mother was quiet for a very long time when I finished. Not the quiet of a person trying to figure out what to say. The quiet of a person who already knows something. A weighted, heavy, particular quiet that I recognized, even through the fog of what I was feeling, as something other than shock. "Mama," I said. "You're not surprised." A pause. "Mia." "You already knew something," I said. "I can hear it. What do you know?" Another pause. Longer. "There is something I should have told you a long time ago," my mother said. "And I am so sorry that I didn't." What she told me took about 10 minutes to get through because she kept stopping to compose herself, and I let her stop and I waited. I was sitting on Carla's guest bed with my coat still on. I had not taken the coat off. At some point during the call I realized I was still holding my own phone with both hands, gripping it harder than necessary. What she told me was this. Before I had met James, before I had even left for Edinburgh, James had briefly visited Istanbul with a mutual friend of his and Layla's, a connection I had never known about because it had happened while I was living temporarily in another city for a work project. He and Layla had, in that brief visit, become close. Romantically close. It had lasted only a few months, conducted mostly over messages and one more visit before it had faded and both of them had moved on, or so my mother had been told. When I started dating James, when I began talking about him to my family, Layla had told my mother the truth of their brief history. And my mother, after a long and apparently agonizing conversation with my father, had made a decision that she now could not justify, but had believed at the time was the right one. She had decided not to tell me. Because James and Layla had both assured her it was completely over. Because she had convinced herself it was ancient history. Because she did not want to poison something that was clearly making her daughter happy. "Layla told you," I said, very slowly, that she had a history with the man I was falling in love with, and you decided not to tell me. Mia, I thought. And then I got engaged to him. And you came to Edinburgh and you met him and you told me he was a good man and not to let him go. And you knew. The silence on the other end of the line was the silence of a woman who had no defense for what she had done and knew it. I'm pregnant, I said. The words came out flat, barely inflected, dropped into the conversation like stones into still water. My mother made a sound I had never heard from her before. Not a word.
Just a sound.
I just found out tonight, I said. I just found out tonight, and tonight I also found my fiancé kissing my sister in a bedroom at a dinner party, and now you are telling me that you knew they had a history, and I need you to understand that I cannot be on this phone right now. I hung up. I turned my phone over and put it face down on the bathroom tiles and sat with it. I want to tell you what I did next, but first I want to tell you what I felt because I think it matters. I felt, in that specific sequence, rage and grief and betrayal, and then, underneath all of those, something much quieter and more dangerous. A stillness. The kind of stillness that comes after you have processed the first wave of something enormous, and your mind is now very calmly, very coldly, beginning to make plans. I sat on that bathroom floor for a long time. I thought about the dinner party happening one floor below me, the low sound of music and laughter that I could just barely make out through the floor. I thought about James's face when he turned and saw me in the doorway. I thought about my sister's expression, that half-second of defiance before she rearranged it. I thought about the 8 months and the 3 years and the proposal and the ring and the venue tastings and the laptop in our kitchen the previous week with Layla sitting beside me scrolling through floral arrangements. I thought about the small test stick on the edge of the sink. I was not going to fall apart on this bathroom floor. I had something to protect now that was more important than my pain. And that knowledge rearranged everything, quietly and completely, the way the most important realizations arrive, not with drama, but with the simple, absolute weight of being true. The next day was worse in some ways and clarifying in others. James came home late the previous night, long after I had moved from the bathroom floor to the bed, and he slept on the couch without being asked to, which told me that he was at least not stupid enough to try to minimize what had happened. In the morning, he knocked on the bedroom door and asked if he could come in, and I said yes because I needed to see his face when I told him. I was sitting on the edge of the bed. He came in and sat in the chair by the window, and he looked like a man who had not slept at all and knew he didn't deserve to. I need to tell you something, I said. Mia, what happened was, I'm pregnant. The silence that followed was complete. He stared at me. The color shifted in his face, something complex moving through it, and I watched him and felt nothing except the cold, clear clarity of a person who has already decided what they need. I don't want to discuss our relationship right now, I said. I don't want to hear an explanation or an apology or a promise. I am going to ask you one question, and I need you to answer it honestly. He nodded. Did you know about Layla? Before we got together? Did you know she was my sister before we got serious? A pause. I knew you had a sister, he said. I didn't know it was, he stopped. Not until we had been together for a few months and she visited on a video call. And by then, I didn't know how to tell you. So for 3 years, I said, you knew you had a history with my sister and you chose every day for 3 years not to tell me. He put his face in his hands. Get out of the room, please, I said. I heard him on the phone later that morning. Through the thin wall of our Edinburgh flat, his voice low, careful, the tone of someone conducting a conversation they don't want overheard. I pressed my ear to the wall for exactly long enough to determine whose voice answered on the other end. It was Layla's. I stepped back from the wall and sat on the edge of the bed again. That told me everything I needed to know about the state of the situation. I was not going to make any decisions about my pregnancy or my future under the pressure of immediate crisis. I knew that much. I also knew, with the same crystalline certainty, that I needed to speak to someone who actually had my interests at heart, and that right now the field of available candidates was smaller than it had ever been. I called my friend Selin, who had been my closest friend since university in Istanbul and who now lived in Amsterdam. Selin, who had never particularly warmed to James despite being polite about it, and who had met Layla enough times to have opinions that she had largely kept to herself out of loyalty to me. I told her everything in one long, unbroken stream, and when I finished she said, very quietly, "Mia, what do you need?" "I need someone who is actually on my side," I said. "I am always on your side," she said. "Now listen to me. You're going to get through this. Not because it's not as bad as it feels right now, it is exactly as bad as it feels. But because you're the strongest person I know, and because that baby needs you to be steady. So let's talk about what you need to do, step by step, starting from right now." That conversation lasted 4 hours. By the end of it, I had a list. Not an emotional list, a practical one. What I needed to do this week. What I needed to do this month. What I was going to be careful about, and what I was not going to waste energy on. Selin has always been this way, the person who responds to catastrophe with a legal pad and a working timeline, which sounds cold, but is in fact one of the most loving things a person can offer you when everything is falling apart. 2 days later, I received a message from my mother. A family gathering was being organized, not in Istanbul, but a video call with both sets of grandparents and assorted family elders who had been informed through my mother and apparently also through Layla about both the pregnancy and the situation. The message framed it as a conversation about the family's future. It asked me to attend. I attended because I wanted to look the people who were supposed to protect me directly in the face. The call connected with 12 people on it, my parents and both sets of grandparents and 2 aunts and an uncle, all of them arranged in various rooms across Istanbul. James was in the next room. I had asked him to be available but not present for the opening of the call, a distinction that seemed to confuse him, but that I was clear about. Layla was on the call from her own phone, sitting in what appeared to be her bedroom, wearing a soft, sad expression she had clearly assembled in advance. She looked like a woman who had spent time in front of a mirror considering how contrition should present itself. The family talked for the first 20 minutes without anyone saying much of substance, the careful circling of people who know there is a large object in the center of the room and have not yet decided how to approach it. My father cleared his throat several times. My aunts exchanged glances that I could see even through a screen. The grandparents who had been brought into this were quiet, waiting for the people who had called the gathering to define its purpose. Then my grandmother, my father's mother, who is 81 years old and has never in my memory said an unnecessary word, spoke. "Mia," she said, "there is a child coming, and a child needs its father. Whatever has happened, the family needs to come together." And there it was, the framework for the entire conversation, established by the most senior voice in the room before anything real had been said. I let everyone else speak first. I sat and I listened to the arguments, which varied in their specifics, but were unified in their conclusion. James loved me. It was a mistake. Layla was family. The baby needed stability. These things could be worked through. Other families had worked through worse. I was upset now, but would I not regret a hasty decision later? Was I not thinking of the child? My uncle said that men sometimes made mistakes, but what mattered was what they did after. My aunt said that Layla was young and emotions were complicated. My other grandmother, my mother's mother, said that she had forgiven my grandfather for something she declined to specify and that their marriage had lasted 46 years. My mother said very little, which was its own kind of statement. My father said that family was the most important thing. And through all of it, Layla sat on her screen with her soft, sad expression, occasionally allowing a tear to move down her cheek with the elegant timing of someone who has rehearsed. She did not speak until she was invited to. Then she spoke. Her voice wavered carefully at all the right moments. She said that she and James had a past that she had not handled correctly, that feelings had resurfaced in a moment of weakness, that it would never happen again. She said she loved me. She said she was sorry in a way that she hoped I would be able to hear. She said she only wanted what was best for me and the baby. What she did not say was, I was on the phone with James the morning after, when Mia could hear me through the wall. What she did not say was, I knew before Mia started dating him, and I said nothing. What she did not say was that the tears she was producing on this call and the ones she had produced in the bedroom were manufactured to specification. I noticed on her screen that she kept her left hand out of frame. Just slightly. Just enough. I waited until the room had said everything it had to say. Then I asked James to join the call. He sat next to me. 12 faces on the screen looked at us. I could feel him beside me, the particular warmth of someone sitting too close and too carefully at the same time, the careful stillness of a man trying very hard not to telegraph anything. I want to address some things, I said. My voice was very even. I had spent 2 days finding this evenness, and I was not going to lose it now.
James.
You and I have been together for 3 years, engaged for 4 months. And in that entire time, you knew that you had a romantic history with my sister, who I am close to, who has spent significant time in our home, and you said nothing. Not once. You let me build a future with you while holding information that was mine to have. You made that choice every day for 3 years. He began to say something. I held up a hand. I'm not finished. Layla, you knew before I started dating this man that you had a history with him. You watched me fall in love with him. You came to our flat. You sat at our table. You helped me look at wedding venues on a laptop in our kitchen last week, and you said nothing. I paused. And the adults in this family who knew any part of this history also said nothing, because the collective decision was made that my happiness and my right to accurate information about my own life was less important than everyone's comfort. A longer pause. 12 screens. I also want to address something about this gathering. I continued. This conversation has been framed as being about what is best for the baby. I want to be very clear that the baby is also the reason I am sitting here instead of having removed myself from this situation entirely. But I want you all to understand something about what is best for a child. A child is not best served by a father who is still emotionally involved with her aunt. A child is not best served by an extended family that collectively decides the woman carrying that child does not need to know the truth about her own relationships. A child is best served by a mother who is not being deceived by every person she trusts simultaneously. Layla started crying. The tears came on schedule, right on the beat where the argument was tipping toward her. She said my name in a broken voice. She said she was sorry. She said she loved me. She moved her left hand to cover her face as she cried. And for just a moment, as her hand moved, I saw what was in it. She had been holding her phone under the call device. There was a message thread visible on its screen for 1/2 second before she covered her face. I could not read the words, but I could see the name at the top of the thread. It was James's name. They had been messaging each other during this call, while 12 family members were trying to convince me to reconcile with a man and forgive a sister, while Layla was crying and performing remorse for the assembled family. She had been texting him under the table. I looked at James beside me. He had his phone face down on the table in front of him, which had seemed considerate and respectful when he sat down. I'm going to say one more thing, I said, and now my voice was different, quieter, slower, the voice of someone who has just received the last piece of information they needed. While we have been on this call, James and Layla have been messaging each other. I just saw the thread on her phone. I looked directly into the camera. So whatever this call was supposed to accomplish, I want you all to understand that the people you are asking me to reconcile with and forgive were simultaneously texting each other during the conversation about whether I should forgive them. The silence was enormous. Even through 12 screens, in 5 different rooms across Istanbul, it was enormous. James didn't deny it. Layla put her phone down very carefully. I am going to go now, I said. I want everyone on this call to understand that I love them, and I am furious at them, and right now those two things cannot coexist in the same space. When I am ready to talk, I will reach out. I looked directly into the camera for a moment, at all the faces of people I had trusted. I want you all to sit with the fact that every person on this call had information that was mine to have, and none of you gave it to me. Think about what that says about how you see me. Not as a wife-to-be, not as a daughter, not as a sister, as a person. I closed the laptop. James tried to speak as I moved past him. I held up my hand without turning around, and he went quiet. I went into the bedroom and I shut the door, and I sat on the floor with my back against the bed, and I let myself feel, in full, everything I had been managing so carefully for 2 days. I cried for a long time. The ugly, shaking, complete kind. I cried for the engagement, for the ring I had thrown across a bedroom, for the wedding that was not going to happen, for the version of my future that I had believed in completely and that now did not exist. I cried for my sister, for 29 years of a relationship I had loved and believed in, and for the specific grief of a betrayal that has roots deep enough to reach all the way back through your childhood. I cried for my mother, for the specific hurt of a parent's failure that is different from any other kind. And then, at the end of it, I put my hand flat on my stomach and I said, out loud, to no one and to this small person who did not yet know she existed, we are going to be fine. I don't know exactly how yet, but we're going to be fine. I believed it. Shakily, incompletely, with none of the evidence yet assembled that would eventually support the belief. But I believed it, and belief is sometimes where the road begins. Over the following weeks, I moved through the necessary practicalities with the same efficiency I have always brought to things that simply need to be done. I ended the engagement formally and in writing, in a message to James that was clear and final and did not leave a door open. He responded at length, twice. The first message was a long, thorough apology that covered every angle and asked in return for the chance to try again. The second, 3 days later, was shorter and more honest, acknowledging that he understood I wasn't going to respond, that he had done what he had done, that he was sorry. I read both. I acknowledged the second one with a single line. I did not continue the exchange. He moved out within 2 weeks. I kept the flat because the lease was in my name, which had been James's insistence when we'd signed it, a detail I now understood as the universe quietly leaving me a practical exit. I took it. I told my work what I needed to tell them about the pregnancy, which they received kindly and without drama. I told my Edinburgh friends the full story, in different degrees of detail depending on how close we were, and every single one of them responded the way good people respond to someone they care about being hurt, with presence and without performance. Selin flew from Amsterdam to Edinburgh for a weekend in the 6th week of my pregnancy. She appeared at my door with a rolling suitcase and enough groceries to feed both of us for a week, and she slept on the couch that James used to sleep on and made me eat properly, and did not once tell me what she thought I should do. She simply sat with me in my flat, in my life, as it actually was. She is one of the best people I know, and I do not say that lightly. The pregnancy itself was physically uncomplicated, which I was grateful for in a way that went beyond the usual gratitude, because I did not have surplus emotional reserves to also manage physical crisis. The baby was healthy. The appointments were routine. I learned the particular rhythm of single pregnant personhood, the way you carry everything with you because there is no one to leave it with, the way you learn to ask for help in small specific ways because no one can guess what you need if you don't say it. I asked. People helped. This was a lesson. The family communications were sparse and careful. My mother called several times. I answered some calls and not others, not out of cruelty, but out of genuine limitation. I was managing a significant amount and could not also manage her guilt on top of my own. What I told her, on the calls I did answer, was that I needed time, that I would reach out when I was ready, that I loved her even when I was angry at her. She cried during most of those calls. I let her cry. There was nothing else to do, and my father called once. A short call, my father being a man of few words about emotional things. Within those few words, he said something that landed in a way I hadn't expected. He said, "Mia, I should have told you. That was a mistake. I am sorry." No justification, no context, no explaining the reasoning. Just the admission, plainly delivered. I told him I heard him. That was all either of us had for the call, but it was more than I had expected, and I found that it mattered. Layla sent messages across the following weeks. The early ones had that same composed, structured quality I recognized from the family call, drafted and redrafted before sending. But they became less polished over time, shorter, more fragmented, and eventually what came through was something that sounded more genuinely like my actual sister, uncertain and sorry, and not entirely sure how to reach me. I read every single one of them. I didn't respond to any of them. I was not ready, and I was not going to pretend readiness I didn't have because I have learned the hard way that performed healing is not the same as actual healing, and it serves no one. What I want to tell you about is a Tuesday in February when I was 7.5 months pregnant and feeling, physically, like a person who is carrying a significant additional weight and has been doing so for quite some time. I had a craving for a specific soup from a Turkish restaurant in the new town that I had discovered in my second year in Edinburgh, a place small enough that everyone who went there regularly became vaguely familiar with each other over time. I went alone, as I often did. I ordered my soup. I was reading something on my phone when the man at the next table asked me if the soup was good, because he had never been to this restaurant before and was trying to decide what to order. His name was James too, which I told him I found logistically challenging given recent history, and he laughed and suggested that I call him by his surname, which was Okafor, which I told him was a significant improvement. He was Canadian, visiting Edinburgh on a work contract for 3 months, a structural engineer working on a building project in Leith. He was kind in the unhurried, genuine way that some people are, the way you can feel in the first 5 minutes of a conversation. We talked through my soup and his soup and a tea each afterward, and before I left he asked if he could have my number, which I gave him. That evening he texted to say it had been a genuinely good conversation and that he hoped I would be back at the restaurant soon. On our second meeting, which was a week later, I told him I was 7.5 months pregnant and no longer engaged. I told him this at the beginning of the meal, before we'd even ordered, because I felt he deserved to know the full landscape before he decided how much of the territory he wanted to walk into. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "That sounds like a lot to have navigated on your own."
"It has been," I said.
"And how are you doing with it?" "Better every week," I said. "Some weeks better than others." He nodded. "For what it's worth," he said, "you seem remarkably grounded for someone carrying that much." "I have a good reason to be grounded," I said, and put my hand on my stomach, and he smiled in a way that was warm and completely uncomplicated, and that made something in my chest, which had been very tightly closed for several months, open just slightly. We met 4 more times in the following 3 weeks. I want to be honest about what happened and not make it sound more dramatic or more cinematic than it was. It was not a sweeping romance. It was something quieter and more durable than that. 2 people who found honesty easy with each other from the very first conversation, who discovered over 5 evenings that they wanted to keep finding out what the other person thought about things. He asked good questions and he listened to the answers without waiting for his turn to talk, which sounds like a low bar and is not. There was an evening in the 3rd week when I was tired in the bone-deep way that the final weeks of pregnancy produce, and I mentioned offhandedly that I was too exhausted to cook and was probably going to have cereal for dinner. He showed up at my door 45 minutes later with takeout containers of 3 different things because he hadn't known what I wanted and had bought options. He sat on the floor of my living room while I ate because all the furniture was mine, and none of the choices about where things went had accounted for visitor, and we talked for 2 hours, and at the end of it he said goodnight at the door, and nothing else. No pressure, no implication, just goodnight. That was the evening I understood something clearly. I had spent 3 years with a man who had been performing honesty while withholding it. And here was a person who showed up with 3 takeout containers because he wasn't sure which one I wanted, and didn't want to guess wrong. The difference between those 2 things is, I think, the whole of what I was looking for without having been able to name it. He met my daughter before she was born, in the way that people who become important to you during a pregnancy become woven into the story of the time before the baby arrives. He drove me to an appointment when my back was too sore for the bus. He sat with me through one of the harder afternoons, one of those late pregnancy afternoons when everything felt enormous and I couldn't quite see past it, and he didn't try to fix it or minimize it. He just stayed. Small things. The most important kind of things. I told him the full story of James and Layla and the family call before we got serious. Not as a test, not as a warning, but because he deserved to know exactly who I was and what I was carrying and make his own informed choice about whether he wanted to be there. He listened to the whole thing. Then he said, "I want to be clear that being here for you includes being there for whatever this baby needs. That's not a burden I'm accepting. That's just what being here means." I believed him. I still believe him. We got married in March, 3 weeks before Clara was born, in the Edinburgh Registrar's office with Selin and one of James's colleagues as witnesses, and afterward the 4 of us had lunch at the Turkish restaurant where we'd met. It was not the wedding I had once planned with someone else. It was, in every way that actually mattered, Better than that wedding would have been because it was chosen freely with full information between two people who knew exactly who they were choosing. Clara arrived on a Thursday in April, promptly and with considerable opinion about everything. She had James's eyes from the first day, which he took an inordinate amount of pride in. I held her in the hospital room and felt the particular feeling of things clicking into their correct arrangement, not perfectly, not without the residual aches of everything that had preceded this moment, but correctly.
Right.
My parents found out about the marriage the day after the wedding, when I called to tell them, also taking that opportunity to tell them that I was not ready to see them, that I understood they had made their decisions from a place of love, and that I needed more time before I could be in the same room with them and feel safe. My mother cried. My father said he was proud of me, which surprised me enough that I had to sit with it for a few minutes after the call. I think he meant it. I want to tell you something about the months that followed Clara's birth that I think matters to the story. People often frame the part where the woman rebuilds her life as the easy part, the reward after the suffering, the place where everything resolves neatly. That's not how it works. Rebuilding is its own kind of work. There were days when I was exhausted past the point of thought, days when Clara cried for reasons I couldn't identify, and I sat on the floor of her nursery at 2 a.m. and cried alongside her because I didn't know what else to do. There were moments when the size of what I had lost, not just the engagement, but the version of my family I had believed in, landed on me all over again when I was least prepared for it. What got me through those moments was, firstly, my husband, who turned out to be exactly who he had presented himself as being, which I no longer took for granted as a baseline expectation. And secondly, my daughter, who had no investment in my past and no awareness of the complicated wreckage she had been born into and who simply needed me, consistently, completely, in the most grounding and humbling way. She needed me to show up. So I showed up. I also, around the time Clara was 3 months old, started therapy. Not because I was falling apart, but because I had learned by then that preventative maintenance is more effective than emergency repair, and because I had things to process that deserved more than the inside of my own head. My therapist was a Scottish woman named Aileen, who had a directness I found bracing in the best possible way. She didn't let me get away with framing things in ways that protected the people who had hurt me at my own expense, and she didn't let me catastrophize myself into a corner either. She helped me understand the difference between grief and resentment, and why releasing the latter didn't require releasing the former. I went to her once a week for 8 months. It was among the best investments I have ever made. About 6 months after Clara was born, I heard from Selin, who heard from mutual acquaintances in Istanbul, that James and Layla were no longer together. The story that filtered through, in the fragmented, telephone game way that information moves through social circles, was that James had met someone else, another woman, and had ended things with Layla without much ceremony. That Layla had been blindsided. That she was, in the language of several sources, devastated. I sat with that information for a day before I decided what to do with it, which was nothing. Not because I felt no sympathy for my sister, I did, the specific sympathy of someone who knows exactly what it feels like to be on that side of James's choices. But because sympathy is different from obligation, and the fact that Layla had now experienced something I had experienced did not automatically make right what she had done or repair what she had broken. The message came 3 months after that. Layla, through my mother as intermediary, asking if she could reach out. Wanting to apologize. Wanting, she said, to see her niece. I thought about it for a long time. I thought about 29 years of sisterhood. I thought about the bedroom door. I thought about the message I had found on my phone that week, which was just a photo Selin had sent of Clara laughing at something, and the way that photo made me feel, the pure, uncontaminated joy of a child who exists in a world where the adults around her are honest with each other. I sent a message back, through my mother. I said that I had heard Layla wanted to connect, and that I understood why, and that I was not ready, and that I did not know if I would be, and that I was not going to make promises about a future that I couldn't see clearly yet. I said that I hoped she was okay. I said that I was okay. I said that was probably all I had to give right now. James and I moved to Vancouver when Clara was 9 months old, partly for his work, where a permanent position at a firm he respected had opened, and partly because we had talked about it from early in our relationship and the conversation had never faded, and partly because I had learned, over the preceding year, that building a new life in a new place was not something I was afraid of anymore. I had done it once at 27, chasing a degree in a country where I knew almost no one. The second time felt like a choice made from strength rather than ambition, which is a different and better feeling. We packed the Edinburgh flat in a week. I left behind the neighborhood I had walked through on the worst night of my life, the pharmacy where I had bought the pregnancy tests, the street I had driven down with a shaking hand on the wheel. I kept the memory of the Turkish restaurant. I kept Selin, who came to see us off at the airport, and held Clara and cried and told me she expected a visit within the year. I kept the parts of Edinburgh that had been mine before any of this happened, the gallery where I had met someone who turned out not to be who I thought he was, yes, but also the city itself, the stone buildings with their opinions, the way the light came through in October. Our apartment in Vancouver has too many plants because I cannot stop acquiring them, and not enough closet space because no apartment ever does. Clara is 18 months old. She has strong opinions about everything, which she expresses primarily through pointing and a vocabulary of about 30 words that she uses with enormous confidence. On Sunday mornings, James makes coffee, and I sit on the floor of the living room while Clara builds block towers and destroys them, and the light comes through the window in the particular way Vancouver morning light comes through, which is different from Edinburgh light and different from Istanbul light, and is becoming gradually its own familiar thing. My mother and I talk on the phone once a week. We are building something slowly, the two of us, something that is different from what we had before, and is not yet finished being built. I have told her what I need from her, and she has heard me, and we are working toward a version of a relationship that has honesty in it as a foundation rather than comfort. I think we'll get there. I think love can survive enormous damage if both sides are willing to stop protecting themselves at each other's expense. My father and I speak less often but with more plainness, which suits us both. He has met Clara on video calls, and the expression on his face when he sees her tells me things about him that he would never find the words for. Layla, I do not speak to. I made that choice with my eyes open, not in a moment of anger, but after sitting with it for months and deciding that the people who have a place in Clara's life should be people who showed up for me when it cost them something. Layla did not. She showed up for herself, and she paid a price for it that I genuinely believe was not what she anticipated, and I feel something that is adjacent to sympathy for that. But adjacent is not the same as. And my daughter is not a redemption arc for someone else's story. When I am on the floor on Sunday mornings with Clara and her blocks, I sometimes think about the woman who stood in a hallway 4 seconds too long with a phone in her hand. I think about what she didn't know yet, about the call with her mother, about the family gathering, about the restaurant in the new town in February, about the airport with too many groceries outside her door. I think about how much was about to be asked of her, and how she had no idea. I am glad she took the photographs. I am glad she didn't scream. I am glad she drove home alone and sat on a bathroom floor and told a person who didn't know she existed yet that they were going to be fine. Clara has her father's eyes. She has my stubbornness. She lives in a house where people say what they mean and mean what they say and choose each other deliberately. That is not a small thing. That is, I have learned the whole thing. If you stayed with me to the end of the story, thank you. Please subscribe if you haven't already, and leave a comment. You deserve people who see you fully and choose you honestly. Don't let anyone convince you that less than that is what love looks like.